In part 2 of this episode, we're going to take a look at my other favorite class, the Scout. The Fred, with its heat-reducing special ability and low damage, high rate of fire primaries, favors a more sustained, head-on sort of battle. The Scout, on the other hand, needs to do its damage in bursts. As an A-class mech, the Scout can't take many hits at all, and instead relies on its speed and maneuverability to dance around its opponents. Both the flak cannon and the tow launcher are high damage, high cooldown weapons, and the fact that they're most effective at close range makes for really visceral, in-your-face gameplay. The Scout's special ability causes its fuel reserves to start regenerating immediately and quickly. Considering how much fuel even a single dodge uses up, this is a great ability to pop in the middle of a fight to ensure that you stay light on your feet. You can also use it if you need to get somewhere fast, but don't have the fuel to sprint the whole way. I prefer the flak over the mini flak, because the mini flak's lower damage per shot is less suited to the burst damage style of gameplay that the Scout does so well. I stick with the EMP and repair charge on pretty much all my mechs, but I'd just like to point out that the repair charge is an even better deal for A classes. Since it heals a consistent 250 HP, dropping a repair charge will heal you for about 50% of your health, quite a large amount. I don't have any internals equipped, because I don't see the point of spending Hawken credits on items that have both an upside and a downside, when there are other, more beneficial items to spend them on. For optimizations, you're going to want to invest in speed and defense, prioritizing dodge speed and cooldown, followed by fuel and armor. The Scout lives and dies entirely through its ability to dodge incoming damage instead of absorbing it, but a little extra HP is nice because you'll inevitably take some hits. Moving on, let's look at some gameplay. Shortly after I spawn, I spot someone dashing ahead of me. I notice several things right off the bat. The small frame and 2 thruster jets tells me that I see an A-class mech, either a berserker or infiltrator or scout. The name is familiar too. In fact, this pilot is the same as the one inside the infiltrator that I fought in part 1 of this episode, so I know he's pretty good and that I should be on alert. I'm afraid he might get away, so I dash forward to catch up to him and also to make myself show up on his radar. His mech's small, narrow legs and wide, flat top makes me think that my opponent is another scout. I fire a tow to see if I can do some initial damage, but I mistime my air burst and I do nothing. I follow up with a long-range flak shot. I really don't expect it to do any damage, but the flak shot serves 2 important secondary purposes. First, it grabs his attention. Looking at the radar, there was a duel going on ahead of him, and he was probably aiming to clean up the remains. By plinking him with my flak, I tell him that I'm a more immediate threat, and that he should turn and face me instead. Second, it tells me how much health my opponent has. Hawken's HUD will only display an enemy's HP when they take damage, and so my pot shot reveals that my target is fully healed. After I fired both my weapons, there's no reason for me to maintain a line of sight to my enemy. I already know where he is, and both my flak and tow are reloading, so I can't do any more damage to him at the moment. Moreover, my opponent now knows that I have the jump on him, and I anticipate that he wants to retaliate immediately to take away my advantage. I dodge to the right, breaking line of sight and avoiding his reaction-fired rocket. Knowing his power weapon is on cooldown and that mine has just reloaded, I move in to do my damage without fear of any serious retaliation. A quick glance at my radar tells me he hasn't run away, and so when I step out and see nothing, I know he's hiding around the corner. I know exactly where he is, so I aim to airburst a tow and catch him with a splash, doing damage even while I'm out of line of sight. He smartly dodges out of the corner and avoids most of the tow damage, but I anticipate this from a good player and wait until his dodge ends to slap him with a flak shot, dodging to my right immediately afterwards. Now my opponent is at half health, while I'm still topped off. To make absolutely sure that he has no chance to turn this fight around with a well-placed tow, or EMP, or HE grenade, I get right up in his face. At this range, any area of effect weapon will hurt us both. He tries to create some distance, but I don't let up. I wait for his dash to end before shooting my flak. Whenever you're dealing with a high damage, low rate of fire weapon like the heat with a flak cannon, it's better to be calm and patient, and wait for a good shot. If you fire as soon as your weapon comes off cooldown, you'll have a higher chance of missing, like I do here. On the flip side, however, there's no point in waiting for too long. I hit him with my tow after his dodge ends, and by then my flak is ready to finish him off. Here's what the fight looks like from start to finish.
Should have 2 pugs going on.
In this next duel, I come across my opponent as he's busy killing some other guy. I do him a favor and I steal his kill, simultaneously allowing him to focus his attention on me and giving him motivation to do so. Now at this point, I'm still not sure exactly what I'm up against. I know that the mech size tells me it's a C class. If I had the time, I could open up the scoreboard and refer to the pilot's name to see what he's driving. Looking at the scoreboard is actually a very useful tactic in public games. A person's points and kill-death ratio can be used as a general indicator of skill, so when you join a game, hit tab and see what the top players are, and approach those guys more cautiously. You can then refine your assessment of each individual skill as you battle them in the game. At this point in the deathmatch, I am in second place. As it turns out, this guy, Saturnine, is in first. He's been in the lead the whole game, so I've been keeping an eye on him. I vaguely recall that he's piloting a brawler, so instead of waiting for the lock-on warning of a Rocketeer Hellfire or the thump of a Grenadier's grenade launcher to dodge, I immediately dash to my left to avoid the toad that comes flying at me. As he ducks behind the building, I dash to the right and try to get a better angle for more flak shots. Throughout this whole battle, I take pot shots at him with my flak. Though the weapon's effective range is much shorter than the range that we're fighting at, every little bit of damage helps, so long as I'm not at risk of overheating. Now that he's fully behind the building, we get to put our prediction skills to the test. I initially pre-aimed to the left. As we've seen before, players have an unconscious tendency to continue in the direction they enter cover from. However, I noticed that his dot has stalled on my minimap. Normally, when someone stops like that, it's because they've decelerated and are preparing to change direction. Very rarely will you see an enemy behind cover start moving in one direction, pause, and then start moving in that same direction again. If you keep this in mind, not only will you be able to predict your opponents better, you'll also be able to trick them by doing just what they don't expect. Mind games, man. Mind games. I snap my crosshair to the right and fire off a toe before my enemy even shows up, remembering to dodge immediately afterwards and feeling very rewarded as another toe flies harmlessly past. I fire off a flak shot and dodge again, only to come face to face with a machine gun turret. Normally these turrets make a distinct sound when they're placed, but this one was put down far away and behind a building, so I don't hear it. I take advantage of my speed and dodge right back out of there, but not before leaving another round of flak as a parting gift, and making a mental note to avoid that alley for the rest of this fight. In a duel where every toe and flak shot matters, it's usually a much better course of action to avoid a turret than to waste time and cooldowns to destroy it. As it turns out, my opponent's turret placement, while sneaky, was not optimal. Had he dropped it, say, here, he would have put pressure on me to avoid this entire area, pinning me down into the alley where he would have destroyed me in close quarters. Instead, he cordons off the small, cramped alleyway, which we really don't want to fight in anyways. A-class mechs rely on avoiding damage instead of absorbing it, and they need wide open fields to dodge around in and hunt down slower prey. I notice my health is in the red. A tow rocket flak shot combo could easily finish me off, so I look down and press the hotkey for my repair charge. When you drop a repair charge, it tends to fly a little bit towards the direction that you're looking in before it comes to rest. By staring at the ground before you drop it, you make sure that the repair charge lands at your feet, and that you don't have to move closer to your enemy to absorb it. By now, you sharp-eyed viewers should have noticed what my past self did not. My repair charge is still on cooldown, so instead of healing up, I just end up doing a little bow. I look at my radar and I see that he's near this side of the building. I hold my aim near the corner, but not directly next to it. There's a possibility that he'll dash out instead of peeking out. In that case, if I pre-aimed right at the edge of the corner, I'd have to move my crosshair quite a bit in a very short time span, and this would increase my likelihood that I screw up and miss. Instead, I hold my aim at a spot on my screen that's equally distant from both the corner and the spot where my opponent would end up if he dashed out. That way, it's only a small twitch in either direction to have my crosshair centered on my enemy. It appears my opponent is taking a third option, however, and running away. The only other relatively safe place he can really escape to is behind that pillar made of 2 spheres. Everywhere else is exposed. I'm not sure if he's going to go for it or if he's going to juke back behind the building. To account for both possibilities, I shoot my tow rocket between the two, sidestep back into cover in case he decides to return fire, and then use my internal sense of timing to airburst my rocket after I feel that it has traveled the right distance. Using your internal clock instead of the position of the on-screen missile to know when to airburst is an incredibly powerful trick if mastered, because it helps you further minimize the time you're exposed to fire. Instead of stepping out, firing the missile, waiting until you see it reach your enemy to airburst it, and then stepping back into cover, you can just step out, fire, step back in, and then detonate it. In the meantime, a sabot shot from that sharpshooter in the distance brings me dangerously close to dying, but my opponent is in even worse shape, and the soft caress of a long-range flak is enough to finish him off. My muscle memory again tells me to dodge right after firing, letting me avoid the last gasp tow rocket that could have turned this victory into a draw. Here's what the fight looks like from start to finish. You may have noticed that in the previous fight, I kept my distance from my opponent, even though the scout excels at close ranges. That's because the brawler mech also has the same weapons that the scout does, but those weapons are mounted on a frame with 70% more health. At close ranges, though it is much easier to circle strafe around your opponent and your enemy has to turn wider angles in order to follow you, there's very little room for error. By keeping the battle at longer ranges, I minimized the damage that the flak shots could do, and I took advantage of the scout's smaller size and better maneuverability to come out ahead in the tow rocket exchanges that made up the bulk of the fight. In this duel, I will show you what happens when you fail to adjust your playstyle according to your enemy's class. Examine the state that the battle is in right now. I'm facing the same guy, but instead of keeping my distance, I've been fighting him up close. Up until this point, I've outplayed him at every turn. I've hit him with a few flaks and tows, and I've only taken some light damage in return. However, all this has only served to bring my opponent down to roughly the same HP that I have. One mistake in this cramped environment, and all my gains go out the window. The mistake that I make is that I get impatient. I want to keep the pressure up, so I chase him around the corner and run headlong into this. The brawler has dropped his repair charge and has absorbed almost all of it, and now has his guns aimed squarely in my direction. A single flak shot drops me from 433 to 310, and my own rocket splash knocks me down again to 245. I fall back immediately, but my enemy's flak, followed by an airburst rocket, leaves me at 71 HP. In the span of 1 second, I lose 362 hit points. I drop a repair charge to heal up and do a 180 as my enemy approaches me from behind. I make the poor choice to dodge out of cover instead of into it, and as a result I catch a fatal case of the deads. With my small HP pool, I really can't afford to make mistakes like that in close quarters, and I should have engaged from further away, or not at all. Here's what the fight looks like from start to finish. This next duel is one of my favorites. Faced with the prospect of fighting two enemies on the high ground and at long range, I reason I'll have better luck seeking out targets in closer quarters instead. As I turn around, I spot an enemy on my radar just before he appears around the corner. I've told you that dashing, boosting, jumping, and shooting will all reveal yourself on your enemy's radar. As it turns out, if you're very close to each other, even walking will reveal yourself on the other pilot's radar. Here's a link to a forum post that explains the small nuances of how the Hawken radar works. Just when my opponent steps out of cover, I have a tactical decision to make. Do I fire my tow now to immediately do some damage, or do I wait until after he dodges to guarantee a hit? Let's consider what his dodging options are if I were to fire my missile in the next frame. 1. He dodges to the right, back into cover. 2. He dodges to the left, but his dash is cut short when he runs into the corner. 3. He boosts towards me. 4. He stands still, or walks. 5. He jumps. If he stands still or dashes towards me, he'll take a direct tow to the face. I don't expect my opponent to stand still. If he dashes to the left or jumps, I can airburst my rocket and hit him with a decent amount of splash. If he dashes to the right, I can hit him with a bit of splash, but more importantly, he won't be in a position to fire back, and I can easily disengage until my tow is off cooldown again. Based on these factors, it's a good idea to fire my rocket right away. Though waiting might guarantee an easier shot and more damage done, if you delay the first shot, you also delay every rocket afterwards. In a duel where the last tow often decides who wins and who dies, waiting for a better shot might not always be the best course of action. I hit him with an airburst tow and immediately dodge. You'll notice that as I do so, I turn my mouse and keep it aimed at the corner. Because my enemy dodged to the left, this puts my crosshair right back on him after my dodge ends. This is a good habit to get into, doing as many actions as you can in a short amount of time. During your dodge, you only lose control of your feet. Your torso and weapons still work, so use them if you can. You should know what comes next. Shoot a flak, dodge right afterwards. Though I get tagged by the airburst, I still avoid taking full rocket damage. Now that my opponent has used his power weapon, I can be aggressive. Be aggressive. I have the advantage right now because my toe will be off cooldown before his, which means that, for a short while, my damage potential is higher. Here's a little graph to help me illustrate my point. Assume my opponent and I have perfect aim, and we both start off with the same amount of HP. I fire my toe first and do a fair bit of damage. We both pelt each other with a flak shot, doing a little bit more damage, and then he fires his toe, and brings us both down to the same HP again. Though we are now tied again in terms of HP, for the time span between when I shot my rocket and he fired his, I was briefly ahead. Though we are perfectly matched in skill, I can gain an advantage purely by being the first to shoot. If I keep shooting my toe as soon as it comes off cooldown, my opponent will hit 0 HP before I do. I shoot a flak and then boost ahead to chase. As I do, I watch my reload meter. When it's about to complete, I stop and fire again. You can't shoot while dashing forward, but if you do it while your weapons are reloading or cooling down, you can close in on your enemy without sacrificing your damage output. Matteau is just about to finish reloading, and I want to use it as soon as possible because I want to keep my timing advantage. It looks like my enemy is dashing forwards, so as soon as that fact registers in my brain, I start to aim at this corner, mentally preparing to fire my rocket as soon as my crosshair gets there. Brilliantly, my opponent immediately turns his forward boost into a side dodge, causing me to miss completely. Normally, when you see someone boosting, they're committed to traveling in that direction. Any turns you do while you're boosting tend to be very slow and have a very wide radius, and if you stop, you have to waste a fraction of a second decelerating. Dashing, however, lets you bypass this deceleration and immediately and unpredictably change direction. You can also reverse this order of actions to perform another type of juke. Normally after dashing, there's a short cooldown period, as indicated by this HUD icon, before you can dash again. However, this cooldown doesn't apply to boosting forwards, so if you dash to the side and then boost, you can do a very quick 90-degree juke. This move is so effective, it makes me miss twice. He then follows it up with another clever but very risky trick. He starts boosting long enough for me to react by swinging my mouse to the right and getting ready to shoot. However, he then just suddenly stops, and as a result I overpredict and end up shooting just ahead of him and missing. The duration of the forward boost for this sort of juke is very hard to get right. Too short, and I don't really have time to notice that you've boosted at all, and I'll just shoot you when you stop. Too long, and your movement becomes predictable. Had my enemy continued to boost for just a couple milliseconds longer, he would have eaten every single pellet of my flak shot, instead of evading it completely. He then uses this brief moment to turn towards me and perform another side dash. Luckily for me, I managed to launch a toe right at his feet just before he kills me with a rocket of his own. Had he chosen to dodge in the other direction, he most likely would have survived. At the end of a very intense and very well played fight, he types out GF, which stands for good fight. It's always nice to see players do something like this. A bit of sportsmanship can go a long way towards earning other pilots' respect. Here's what the fight looks like from start to finish. And that just about wraps it up for this two-part episode on dueling Hawken. I actually had a lot more footage I meant to use here, but for the sake of this video's length, and actually getting it done sometime before the heat death of the universe, I'll include all that at the end of this video, unedited. Like before, look over the footage at your leisure and try to pick apart the battles play by play. See if you can make any interesting observations of your own. Until next time, see you on the battlefield. Wolfie, out.